So now that we have covered the wrath side, I will also present a speculative timeline for the deliverance side. But before I get to it, I need to introduce my Exodus model, which underlies both of the timelines and is based on my interpretation of celestial signs. The initial sign was the Moedim Tetrad of 2014 and 2015 that put the world on notice. The Passover 2014 eclipse was followed by a rare non-central annular eclipse on April 29, 2014. This eclipse came closer to missing the Earth without actually missing it than any other in 5,000 years. And it occurred 1,210 days before a series of 6 total eclipses, each 1,211 days apart, started. So I think this would-be ring of fire was the warning to the nations in the path of the series that follows that God will be a wall of fire around his people to the ends of the earth in the days to come. After the eclipse came the 2014 Gaza War. The conflict was defined by the abduction and murder of 3 Israeli teenagers, followed by the retaliatory murder of a Palestinian teenager, and it lasted from July 8 to August 26. The second eclipse occurred on Sukkot of 2014, and the third on Passover 2015. Between these 2 eclipses, there was a total eclipse in the 18-year Saros 120 cycle at the head of the year on March 20th, 2015. The final in the series occurred on Sukkot 2015, and it coincided with the start of a major escalation, including heightened tensions at the Temple Mount. Concurrently, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas declared the Palestinian Authority would no longer be bound by the Oslo Accords territorial divisions. All of this contributed to the outbreak of the Ninth Intifada, a wave of violence characterized by individual lone wolf attacks. 2017 saw the first great American eclipse. Its path, combined with the 2024 eclipse, formed an X across the U.S. 2017 is also the costliest year on record for U.S. natural disasters, and it marked the inauguration of Donald Trump following the 2016 election. A month later, on September 23rd, the Revelation 12 sign occurred shortly after Yom Teruah. The sign began in 2016 with the hyperbolic comet C2017E1 making its first appearance in our solar system. It is interpreted as symbolically marking the conception of Jupiter around November 17, 2016. This interpretation is based on the comet's trajectory, which appeared to move out of the loins of Leo and enter the womb of Virgo on November 20th, 2016, just before Jupiter began its 307-day gestation. The comet then proceeded to exit the inner solar system, and because of its path, it is never projected to return. The entire sign culminated in the birth event on September 23, 2017, one day after Yom Teruah, when Jupiter exited the constellation amidst the unique celestial alignment described in Revelation 12. December 14, 2020 was the mathematical center point between the 2017 and 2014 American eclipses. It occurred during Hanukkah and saw the second of a pair of total eclipses over Chile and Argentina. The first occurred on July 2, 2019. This eclipse closed the year defined by the global pandemic, domestic civil unrest triggered by the George Floyd event, and the transition of Trump from office following the signing of the Abraham Accords. 75 years after the establishment of the State of Israel, on May 14, 1948, Hamas attacked a trance music festival on the last great day following Tabernacles, marking the beginning of the 2023 Gaza War. This attack followed a series of Passover season confrontations at the Temple Mount, which Hamas cited as a primary provocation for their Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. It was the largest attack in Israel's history. 7 days following the beginning of the Gaza War, a ring of fire eclipse passed from the west coast of the U.S. through Texas to Mexico, Central America, Colombia, and Brazil. March 2024 marked the first darkening of the moon in a series of 4 annual eclipses during the commemoration of Purim. In the book of Esther, her true ethnicity is unknown to all but Mordecai and herself. This concealed identity proves key when the people are threatened with genocide by Haman the Agagite. Agag was an Amalekite, and Amalek was Esau's grandson and Israel's nephew who became their covenantal enemies after the Exodus. After Haman's plot was revealed, Esther called a domestic fast and decided to risk her life to intercede for her people. And her coming to the king unannounced resulted in the king's reading of the Chronicles. This action, along with Esther's courage, secures the decree for Israel to fight back and fulfills Israel's mandate to wipe out Amalek. This sign seems to signify the revelation of Israel's concealed identity and to prophesy the judgment and reversal of the Haman-like figure that oppresses the nation. The second great American eclipse marked an X over the U.S. mainland, intersecting the first near Carbondale, Illinois, also known as Little Egypt. Together with the annular eclipse, they also formed the Paleo-Hebrew letter Aleph, pinpointing the U.S. as the starting location of the Exodus and figurative Egypt. Following the eclipse and 2 assassination attempts, Trump was reelected as the second U.S. president to ever serve 2 non-consecutive terms. So I see him as Pharaoh. January 20th, 2025 marked the beginning of Trump's second term. And on his first days back in office, Project 2025 went into full effect as he issued an executive order to end birthright citizenship and rescinded several DEI legislations. On January 29th, he issued an order further combating anti-Semitism that aligns with the goals of Project Esther, which was created by the same group on October 7, 2024, 1 year to the day after the start of the Gaza war. On February 3rd, a lawsuit was filed by DEI advocates to stay the executive orders. On February 21st, a federal court judge granted a preliminary injunction, essentially blocking their execution. But on Purim, the Fourth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals stayed the injunction, reinforcing the execution of the orders. On the same day, an order dismantling the MBDA and CDFI fund was issued. This was followed by more DEI orders on March 18th and 19th, so Purim was marked by a strike on minority groups, of which Black America is the face. On March 19th, Netanyahu showed support for the policies, and on March 27th, he commended Trump's decisive action against anti-Semitism, although shortly afterwards in May, Israel granted a maximum 2-year temporary residency to the blacks of Dimona who were under threat of deportation. In September 2025, it was revealed that Israel had been paying the U.S. for a propaganda-based Esther project since June 2025. They don't know if the Esther project is related to Project Esther, but I say this screams Ahasuerus and Haman. September also saw National Security Presidential Memo 7 directing the executive branch to enforce sanctions and disbanding of anti-American and anti-Christian terrorist groups. In December, this was followed by the Bondi Memo instructing the FBI to offer rewards for turning such groups in. The second Purim eclipse was a blood moon. The third Purim eclipse of 2026 is also a blood moon. This sign is followed by the Kufi 2026 Washington, D.C. Summit from July 5th to the 7th. The self-proclaimed primary purpose of the event is to educate and motivate attendees on the biblical and moral imperatives for supporting Israel. This process is intended to translate widespread Christian support into specific U.S. policy and legislative action favorable to the state of Israel, with the stated ultimate goal being to make Israel stronger and her people safer. I will personally be on watch for Trump to make a surprise speech at this event for America's 250th. 2027 opens with the Ring of Fire eclipse on February 6th. Like the total eclipses, this annular is 1,211 days after the one that marked the U.S. Aleph. The path of this eclipse begins in South America and ends in the slave coast of Africa, reversing the first slave trade route. On the 360-day 12-month calendar, which is used in prophecy, I believe the conjunction would be the first day of the month. So this eclipse occurs on the prophetic first day of the 12th month, which is the Ezekiel 32 lamentation for Pharaoh. So this is my projected 6 seal sun darkening sign. This sign is followed by my projected 6 seal moon darkening on February 20th. In Judaism, this day is considered to be Purim Katan, or Little Purim, since a 13th month Adar 2 is expected. But scripture is clear that the lot fell on the 13th day of the 12th month Adar and was commemorated on the 14th and 15th. So this is Purim. And the following month is a moment of silence. On the prophetic calendar, it is the Ezekiel 32 wailing for the multitude of Egypt and the daughters of the famous nation. August of 2027 sees the longest total solar eclipse of the century, and it passes directly over the Red Sea. This eclipse seems to indicate that the year will be marked by the destruction of Pharaoh's army and the commencement of Israel's purging and purification in the wilderness. The Shemitah is the year of mandatory land rest and debt release. The Jews have it beginning 2028, so it should be declared during Sukkot. If we subtract 1960 years, this places the final temple Shemitah from 68 to 69. Subtracting another 35 years makes 33 AD a Shemitah and 26 AD a Shemitah. But because I believe that Yeshua's ministry began Yom Teruah 28, I have the Shemitah as the year of favor he declared in the synagogue at Galilee. So counting 42 years forward, we have 70 to 71 as the Shemitah, with the temple being destroyed and the people being cursed just 2 months before, in what should have been the 6-year blessing of triple increase. Adding 1960 more years, the next Shemitah begins 2030, meaning the previous one began 2023, just days before the Gaza war began. Either way, we are converging on the 280 of Shemitah since the temple was still standing. The number is intriguing, as the standard human gestation period is 280 days, or 40 weeks. The Jubilee is the year of land return and slave release announced by trumpet on Yom Kippur. I assume 29 was a Jubilee because Yeshua didn't come to play third fiddle to Caesar and Herod. The Jews also knew the Messiah would have to get rid of Rome to restore the kingdom to Israel. And it would have happened had they not missed the time of their visitation by crucifying him in the middle of the Jubilee year, which they may not have even been counting any longer at that point. The convergence of the 40 Jubilees and 280 Shemitah years signalize a nation being born, just like the Revelation 12 sign. The resulting math is 7 times 280. So the birth takes place after 7 gestation periods without giving birth. The 7 times that passed mirror the punishment of Nebuchadnezzar when he was driven out as a wild beast for pride and self-exaltation. But afterwards, he came to his right mind, and the kingdom was restored to him. The 2,000-year period also corresponds to the revival and restoration prophecy of Hosea 6. The Passover season of 2030 marks the second offer for Yeshua's kingship, since the first in 30 AD was rejected. This offer will be accepted, commencing the repayment of the 40 years old to Yeshua. The next eclipse is the final annular from North Africa through Europe and Asia on June 1st, 2030. 1,211 days after Pharaoh's annular marked the Exodus route. So where the first two marked the Joel 3 regathering, I think this one is the Joel 3 scattering. So the time of the Gentile ends with Japheth being sent back to his own tents. November 25th of 2030 is the mathematical center point between the 2027 and 2034 Red Sea eclipses. This may mark the purification and commencement of the temple rebuilding efforts following the reclaiming of the land. It sees a total eclipse over Africa and Australia. So when you look at all of them together, they account for all 4 winds. 2032 and 2033 are marked by another tetrad. The first is on April 25th of 2032, which will likely be Passover, given the barley is not Abib in March. The second is on October 18th, which will be Sukkot following a late Passover. The Sorrows 120 returns on March 30th, 2033, which is prophetically Rosh Hashanah. But while Solomon was just starting the temple on the second day of the second month of his reign, I think Yeshua's temple will be complete with its dedication on this day. The third is April 14, 2033, and I think this will be the first national Passover following the dedication of the temple. October 8th of 2033 is the final Sukkot eclipse, and I think this will be the initial fulfillment of Zechariah 14, where all nations come to Jerusalem to worship the King and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. The series closes with the 2034 Red Sea solar eclipse on March 20th of 2034, marking the fulfillment of the Exodus and land restoration. From the earthly perspective, The years between the American eclipses have been turbulent for the U.S., with all but 1 year reaching record highs for either violence or natural disasters. When you compound this with other curious occurrences, like the fact that the Earth's rotation has been speeding up since 2020, with its shortest recorded day being July 5th, 2024, the September 2024 cyclone that dumped years' worth of rain into the Sahara in 2 days, and the increased greening of the Sahel during that same period, it looks to me like the climate change panic is actually God preparing the earth for his people. And if he is preparing the earth, that means the dry bones are being resurrected also. I am convinced that the heavens, along with the coming scriptural convergences, are signaling that the time for the kingdom is at hand right now. And it shows a clear exodus path from the Americas to the Red Sea, which I see as God leading a group of people out of the Americas into the promised land. And in my rainbow model, I try to anticipate what the journey might look like. When you see a rainbow, you should think of 2 things: the flood and God's covenant with Noah. The rainbow is our reminder that God will never destroy the earth again by a flood. It is the visible sign of that covenant. I believe the colors of the rainbow are also covenantal. They represent the 7 covenants God made with humanity, with Noah's being the first we see, followed by Abraham, Isaac, Israel, Levi, David, and finally Yeshua. I call this model the rainbow model because it incorporates the timelines of the flood, the wandering in the wilderness, and Yeshua's ministry into the Exodus model to try to get an idea of what we might expect after we are gathered together into our respective desert training grounds. So this is the cup of salvation that runs concurrent with the cup of wrath for all of us who will be gathered together separately and given the true knowledge of God before uniting to return to the land. We have already seen the implementation of Project 2025, which acts as a systematic economic attack on the Black community, and Project Esther, which claims to combat anti-Semitism. The civil rights movement was the golden era of Black and Jewish relations. But behind the smoke of these 2 projects is one goal: divide and conquer. Project Esther labels the Jews as the target group, and all opposed to it as anti-Semitic Hamans, including several Jewish organizations who have called the project the weaponization of anti-Semitism to shield injustice. But a Haman decree oppresses the Jews. It doesn't protect them. So in truth, the Jews are the perplexed of Shushan, and behind all the propaganda, the Blacks hit by Project 2025 are Ahasuerus and Haman's veiled target group. I detailed the 2025 flood in part 9. But to recap the major dates, 210 was the warning of rain and the selection of Leo as the second Passover goat. On 217, the 40 days of rain began with Trump and the UAE signing an AI deal. And on June 24th, the rain stopped and the 12-day Israel-Iran war ended. But the waters persist until after the second wave has passed. Additionally, there was a wave of actual flooding in Texas that caused Juneteenth celebrations in Houston and Galveston, where the celebration originated, to be postponed. This was followed by the catastrophic flood that hit the Christian Camp Mystic site on July 4th. And I also think these 2 dates will be critical this year. The first thing we get as the dry bones are being resurrected is noise. But God is not in the noise. Everything is already in order for the decree to move from economic to deadly, and the Mordecais, who are already classified anti-Semitic hate groups, come in on their white horse and start to descend around Purim 2026. And since there is no Esther this time, it will run its full course. Haman cast lots for the date of the decree around Rosh Hashanah, and on the day before Passover, the decree was sent out. I think this is when we might see a state response to the Mordecais. On 210 is the warning of rain, which means the red horse is on the horizon. On 217, the 40 days of rain begins, which is followed by racist and nationalist uprisings throughout the summer as the waters prevail on the earth. So this is where I think the patriotic summer comes into view. If the war that is brewing was going to be won in the streets, there would be no need for an exodus. So if you truly want to make a difference, you need to be in the proper standing with God to approach his throne and actually have your case heard. The grace period on the current idolatry is up once the new year begins. So come summer, we get the shaking of the bones. But God is not in the shaking. So there will be prayer calls and fastings with no response. It is just more noise because the law of Moses has been forsaken for the lawlessness of Saul. This is why we need to be in position to stand in the gap. 6 days after I released my Cup of Wrath study, reports came out of a hybrid megapest in Brazil that is already destroying the soy and corn. This report came out after Brazil had already exported record high shipments to the US and elsewhere. These megapests look just like the native species, and while these shipments were coming through, the USDA had prioritized combating the New World screwworm that is threatening the cattle. So for all we know, these megapests could be sitting in the silos just waiting to destroy the U.S. crops once spring has sprung. The good news is there is a backlog of grain from the plenteous 2025 harvest. The bad news is the freezing of already low water levels on the Mississippi River is delaying barge movement, which is putting pressure on rail transport, which is causing international orders of that backlog to be prioritized for exports. This means that by the time the farmers realize they are not dealing with the regular pests and there is no way to mitigate the damage because GMO and pesticides aren't working, all the backlog might already be gone. And the screwworm that they were focused on could also be killing the cattle off if their preventative methods fail. This leaves Oregon, or worse, maybe California, as the last agricultural watch zone. So I suggest that we start buying what we can for our family now while prices are low. And if you can afford it, try to have enough to help out your neighbors also. By the time the shofar sounds, food will be at record high prices, and the dissension of the Mordecais becomes a target on the back of all Israel. As the decree is incited, the wall of free grace lies, daubed with the untempered mortar of kingdom wealth and heavenly provision, collapse around them under the pressure of the rain, hail, stormy winds, and horsemen. And it produces the mass panic and fear necessary to get them to investigate their idolatry. They realize that their apostles and prophets have been lying to them all along, and in their despair, the nation finally searches for truth. As they find it and repent, the scales fall off their eyes, and the wind that is sent to assuage the waters starts to enter the dry bones. So 717 marks the beginning of God's version of Operation Rising Lion. 920 is Ezra's gathering to address intermarriage after a great reign. So this means the return to the law of Moses is in full effect. On 10:1, the mountaintops are seen. And this is also when Ezra starts hearing cases. So I believe this is when the Eastern witnesses appear in Jerusalem. As 2027 comes in, the raven and dove are released in the U.S. on 11:10, but the dove returns, and the Eastern witnesses move to Mecca. On 11:17, the dove is sent again and returns with the olive leaf. On 11:24, the dove is released again and returns no more. So redemption can now begin. 12:1 is the Ezekiel 32 lamentation for Pharaoh. So this begins God's Operation Midnight Hammer. 12:13 begins Purim, which is the date for Haman's decree to be executed. And this is also the prophetic date of the lamentation for the multitude of Egypt and the daughters of the famous nations. And this is followed by the silence of the seventh seal. And I think there are two reasons for this. The first is because it offers the nations a final chance to repent as the redeemed of the East escape to their prepared place before destruction comes. The second is because they're waiting for Purim to come in the wrong month. And after it passes in silence, the U.S. witnesses show up 26 days before the Exodus, and the plagues begin. On Rosh Hashanah, the face of the ground is dry, and it is also the date appointed in Ezra to put away the foreign wives. On 115, the first day of unleavened bread, the Exodus begins. This is followed by the drowning of Pharaoh's army and the test of the bitter waters at Marah, and the 12 wells and 70 palms at Elim. 2:16 is the manna and Sabbath test, and 2:27 marks the day that Noah exited the ark because the earth was dry. So this is when the wilderness trial really begins. And we see tests like the water at Meribah, the attack of the Amalekite, the giving of the Ten Commandments, which probably happened on Shavuot, and the instruction to build an altar. This period is also when the priests and 70 elders dined on the mount, and Moses ascended to get the tabernacle instructions. 40 days later, as Moses descends, a purge comes, so perhaps Moses leaves to gather others into the camp. And when he returns 40 days later, there is a purge. In the original, he ascends again for 40 more days to replace the tablets and renew the covenant. And tabernacle construction begins. On Rosh Hashanah of 2028, the tabernacle is set up in the wilderness. Then there is the first Passover in the wilderness, and on 2/1 was Moses' census. 2:14 is of course second Passover for anyone who didn't make the first. Shortly after this, the silver trumpets are made, and 2:20 is the move from the wilderness of Sinai to the wilderness of Paran, and the Midianites go with them. On 2:23, there were complaints at Taberah about the manna, and on 2:24, God sent quail for a whole month. 3:24 is the day that Miriam and Aaron murmured against Moses, and shortly after that, the spies were sent to Canaan for 40 days. After they returned, the people rebelled by refusing to take the land and were disinherited. But I don't believe that that will be the case this time. So I believe this is the period of time where the trial continues, because afterwards we see a Sabbath breaker being stoned and Korah's rebellion to take the priesthood. And it's also where we get the red heifer purification. I also think the events of the final year in the wilderness, like the bronze serpent and also Balaam's plot, occurs during this time, before the 7th month, because 7/1 is the date that I have for when Yeshua's ministry began. So this is where I have James taking over. 7/5 is the date of the wedding feast at Cana, and I believe Yeshua proclaimed the Shemitah and debt forgiveness in the synagogue on Yom Kippur. The first event of 2029 is the Passover, and this is where Yeshua cleansed the temple. It is followed by the wave offering and the healing of the lame man. Then on second Passover, we have the feeding of the 5,000. And on 2/16, the day when the manna began to fall, was Yeshua's bread of life teaching. Shavuot marks the feeding of the 4,000. And on Yom Kippur, the Jubilee that Yeshua didn't proclaim during his ministry will be proclaimed, signifying debt forgiveness and land restoration. During Sukkot, Yeshua teaches in the temple, and on the last day is the invitation to the living water before the trial of the woman accused of adultery the day after. And the final event of Yeshua's ministry for 2029 is Hanukkah. 2030 is the final year where Yeshua comes to reign. The 4th day of the first month is when Joshua sent spies to Jericho, and they arrived at Rahab's house and departed from there the same night. The 5th, 6th, and 7th days, the spies are hiding in the mountains. But on the evening of the 7th, they return to Joshua. The 8th day is the move from Shittim, and this is when Joshua tells them to prepare, because in 3 more days, they will pass over Jordan. The 9th is the day of sanctification, and the 10th is the crossing of the Jordan. The 11th was the circumcision at Gilgal, since circumcision is required to keep the Passover. And this is the last day it can be done for them to be whole at Passover. Then we have the Passover at Gilgal and the eating of the old corn of the land on the first day of Matzot. On the 16th is when the manna ceased, and the captain of Yahuwah's host appears on the resurrection day. So this is when I think Yeshua descends on Mount Olives. This begins the 7-day Jehoshaphat Megiddo War to take the entire Genesis 15 territory, and it ends on the 23rd. And after it is over, I think we get the Zechariah 12 mourning at Megiddo on the same day that Daniel's mourning ended. Finally, we come to Pesach Sheni, and I think this will be Yeshua's coronation. In the Rav study, I said Passover, but I actually think it will be second Passover. And this coronation will be like Hezekiah's second Passover, which was followed by a 14-day feast, as all Israel comes together and blesses the one who comes in the name of Yahuwah.